radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this, what is it, August 22nd. I mean, August is just almost gone. Still here in Barcelona, as you can see. Hope you all are having a fantastic time, fantastic week. All right, we're going to jump right into the news. I'll just remind you, if you want to shape the shape of the show, then you can do so by asking questions. And I will talk about what you want me to talk about by doing that. So feel free to jump in with Super Chats. Super Chat is open. And yeah, let's jump in. Quick update on Israel. Not a lot here is going on, but, well, a lot is happening on the ground, but not a lot in terms of big news events. It does look increasingly like there will be no deal with Hamas. It does look increasingly like Israel is preparing for a major offensive with regard to Hezbollah in Lebanon. The United States has, it has 2 aircraft carriers, at least 1 submarine, nuclear submarine, a bunch of other Navy assets, dramatically increased Air Force capabilities. I mean, the United States has a big chunk of its military, at least Air Force and Navy, in the Middle East right now. And the reality is that if the United States wanted to, and it should want to, let me be very clear on this, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, it should want to. If the United States wanted to, it could basically destroy Iran and Hezbollah and all of their allies' offensive capabilities in a matter of days. You know, I see commentators out there saying, oh, this is going to bring about a regional war, and American bases and American interests are going to be attacked and going to be destroyed or whatever. But that's just, that's ridiculous. I remember, I mean, all the way back to 1991, I remember in the first Gulf War, when everybody was saying, oh, the United States is going up against the Iraqi army, this is going to be a tough fight, it's going to last for weeks, the U.S. doesn't know what it's getting itself into. And I'm talking about U.S. commentators saying that, U.S. former generals saying that, military, quote, analysts saying that. I don't know what they're talking about. And it's certainly true with Iran and the U.S. and Israel. And, you know, imagine Iran launches, and the U.S., Israel, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Jordan decide they've had enough, and they launch a counteroffensive and destroy, and they could, again, within days, maybe less than days, destroy every single missile launcher, every single missile depot, every single facility that the Iranians have and that their allies have, and it would be gone. Not to mention, they could wipe out the Iranian economy within hours. And Iran knows this. I mean, the U.S. might not know it, and our analysts might be afraid, and our analysts might be ignorant, but the Iranians know it. They know exactly what they're facing. This is why they're hesitating. But they also know that the likelihood that the United States would actually unleash its military, that the likelihood that those aircraft carriers and all those planes would actually go on the offensive versus just playing defense to help Israel, is very close to zero. And that's why, unfortunately, the United States does not have any deterrent power in the world. And this is why wars are breaking out everywhere, because people are not afraid, because they know the U.S. is, without question, a paper tiger. But the reality is, they wouldn't have a chance to survive more than a few days. And the same goes to Hezbollah. For Hezbollah, if the Israelis unleash everything they have on Hezbollah, I mean, I'm not even saying America intervenes, but if the Israelis just unleash everything they have on Hezbollah, I mean, and without really concern about collateral damage or anything like that, then Hezbollah is wiped out. It's finished. But Israel won't do that. Hezbollah knows that, right? So they're all playing to the moral weakness of Western countries to defend themselves. And they're playing to the fact that the United States is timid, it's a paper tiger, and it won't actually go on the offensive in defense of its own interests, in its defense of its own people, in defense of the lives and property of Americans, which Iran has been threatening and violating those rights for decades now. So yeah, everybody's sitting and waiting, giving the Iranians and Hezbollah the strategic initiative. And what we need in the Middle East, actually, what we need in the Middle East right now is escalation. What the Middle East needs right now is a major war, basically, to rid ourselves of the one party in the Middle East that is causing all the problems, and that is Iran. Hamas doesn't have the weapons, the capabilities to launch on October 7th and to then challenge the Israeli military without Iran. They couldn't have built those tunnels without Iran. They wouldn't have had the kind of diplomatic cover without Iran. Hezbollah is nothing without Iran. The Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria are nothing without Iran. I mean, even Assad's regime in Syria, dubious whether it survives. Now, it has support from Russia, but dubious it survives without Iranian support. You take out Iran, you take out this regime in Iran, you basically stabilize the Middle East. Stabilize the Middle East. And that's what needs to happen. They need to be taken out. That need has existed since 1979, but it only becomes more urgent every year in all our attempts to compromise and negotiate and grovel and appease and don't escalate. God forbid, don't escalate. All of that has just made Iran stronger, made opposition weaker, made whatever is coming in the future more desperate. Iran, by the way, is probably, pretty much every intelligence agency in the world seems to believe that Iran right now is accelerating whatever nuclear plans they had, because they realize their only defense in the end of the day, their only defense at the end of the day against the United States and against Israel is nuclear weapons. And if they've resisted up until now because they're afraid of the prolonging of the sanctions, I don't think they care anymore about that. They've got their relationship with China and Russia, and what have they got to lose? And they can see now what a conflict could actually do. And they're going to go all in on nuclear weapons. Another reason why escalation would be a good thing right now. It would be a fantastic opportunity to actually take out and destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities, which is, again, very, very, very doable for Israel and certainly easily doable for the United States. All right. In the meantime, tit for tat continues between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel is accelerating, I said this yesterday, and it continued last night. Israel is accelerating, taking out ammunition depots and other Hezbollah facilities all over southern Lebanon. And that is a continuing, ongoing process to weaken Hezbollah for when the inevitable war, I guess, breaks out. All right, let's see. Okay, so quickly also on Ukraine, an update. I mean, Ukraine's incursion into Russia is completely baffling the Russians. They don't actually know what to do. They have chosen, in a sense, to let the Ukrainians to some extent, let the Ukrainians be and continue the offensives in the Donetsk area, where they're making some progress and they're approaching a significant logistical hub within the Donetsk area. And they are beating back the depleted Ukrainian forces. But at the same time, they're taking massive, losses in the Kursk area. Ukrainian troops are in a position now to encircle an estimated 3,000 Russian troops in Kursk province, where they're hemmed in by a river, where the bridges have been blown up. They can't retreat. They can't get reinforcement. The Ukrainians are using long-range missiles and drones to disrupt any attempt that the Russians are making to either retreat or to get troops, fresh troops and fresh ammo across the river. It looks like these 3,000 troops are probably going to surrender or be slaughtered or whatever. I mean, it really is a horrible situation for the Russians. The Russians are deploying more and more troops to the area, but so far, maybe they've slowed down the Ukrainian advance, but they have not reversed it. This is incredibly embarrassing for Putin. It's incredibly embarrassing for his generals. This is a major defeat. This is the first time Russia has been invaded since World War II. Ukrainian forces expanding control, along the border. They keep crossing the border, not just in the Kursk region, but in other regions, just to keep the Russians on their toes. They seem to be coming at them from all kinds of directions. Russia's learning that they can't protect the 1,000-mile-long border, and that they are being challenged in ways that I don't think they imagined, and being challenged in ways that are clearly embarrassing and demoralizing for them. Good. I'm all for demoralizing the Russians. We will see. We will see what happens in Ukraine. Still, again, there's still a lot of uncertainty about this. Just to be clear, the exact strategic purpose of this incursion into Kursk, into Russia, what the long-term prospects of it are. Can the Ukrainians hold that territory? Do they want to hold that territory? How long are they going to hold that territory? Can they afford to expend troops over there while the Russians are making gains in Donetsk? All of these are interesting open questions. I mean, for all we know, the Ukrainians just retreat from this area completely at some point, and they just force the Russians to beef up their troops along the border, which reduces the amount of troops the Russians can have at the front. I don't know. I don't know what the strategy is, but it is quite fascinating. All right, it's come out, I guess, the last couple of days in the press that in March, President Biden approved a new strategic plan for the nuclear arsenal of the United States, and for the first time has reoriented America's deterrent strategy to focus on China rather than on Russia. So you can say, instead of being pointed to Moscow, they're now all pointed to Beijing. The shift comes as the Pentagon and people in the defense establishment have decided, and one could argue if this is justified or not, that China is the greater threat to the United States in terms of its nuclear capabilities. China is stockpiling large numbers of nukes, and probably with better technology than what the Russians have. They are growing their nuclear capabilities in ways that the Russians and the Americans have not. Russia and America have basically seen the number of nuclear warheads decline dramatically. so the whole orientation, and it has been for years now, the defense orientation of the United States has shifted from the Middle East and Europe towards China. Now, kind of the strategic orientation of the nuclear arsenal is geared towards the Chinese. The Chinese, of course, upset about this. They're complaining about this, as you would expect them to do. But it is going to interesting. It is interesting how this develops, particularly given the reality that Russia is still a threat. You can see that with Ukraine, and you can see that with the Russian ambitions to challenge the United States in terms of its power around the globe. But it's not just Russia. What if Iran becomes a nuclear threat? You've got China, you've got North Korea. So you've got a number of parties in the world now, both on our Atlantic front and on our Pacific front, in Europe, in the Middle East, and in East Asia, that pose a potential strategic challenge to the United States when it comes to nuclear power. And I'm hopeful, but doubtful that the people at the Pentagon, in the administration, in the Defense Department, have the tools, the knowledge, the philosophical clarity to be able to understand what the threats are and how we should appropriately be dealing with them. And can they think about more than one thing at one time? Can they think about more than China at one time? Now, I know it sounds ridiculous to question, the generals but they've given us no reason to think that they are capable. Their ability to execute, their ability to think strategically, there's no evidence that such ability exists. If you look at American foreign policy and you look at American defense strategy, or lack of it, over the last, really since World War II, but particularly over the last few decades, I have no trust in their ability to execute tactically. Look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Look at the intelligence failures, the execution failures, the military failures. In every respect, it was a complete and utter, disaster. I know we can all blame Biden, but can't just be Biden. It's the whole chain of command. It goes all the way down. It includes the fact that there was no intelligence, the fact that the Taliban's capabilities were not known, the fact that the United States did not predict that the Taliban was going to be in Kabul within days. They thought it was going to be months. And on and on and on you can go on how just lame the strategic and tactical thinking and intelligence is. Now, this contradicts what I said, I guess, a few minutes ago about the United States' ability to take out Iran. The fact is that we have the firepower and the capability to take out anybody. Do we have the tactical ability? Probably not as effectively as maybe we could if we had better generals and better thinking and better philosophical guidance. Do we have the strategy? No, not at all. I know what the U.S. military is capable of, and I know that it constrains itself, and I know that part of those constraints are constraints of not just moral constraints in terms of just war theory, but also tactical strategic limitations of just the ability of its generals, the ability of the people running the show, and certainly the ability of our politicians to make the right decisions at the right time. So we could take out Iran, we could take out Iran tomorrow, and we should. Would any American president, would Trump, would Biden order that to happen? No. And if Iran attacks Israel, will the United States and Israel take that as an opportunity to destroy Iran's offensive capabilities? Unlikely, highly unlikely. Answer's pretty much no. But that's what strategy would require. That's the difference between strategy and just responding and letting the enemy, basically letting the enemy initiate, letting the enemy set the terms of every confrontation. All right, talk about China. The European Union has decided that it is going to slap 5-year import duties of up to 36% on Chinese electric cars, so not as high as Biden's 100%, 36%, unless Beijing can offer an alternative solution to damaging, trade conflict over China's state subsidies for the electric auto industry. It's also said that Tesla cars are going to get a special deal, and Tesla cars that are made in China are going to face a lower duty of only 9%. You can imagine the kind of negotiations that went around that to get it down to 9%. Why 9? Why not 8? Why not 7.5? Why not 10? Why not 12? Basically, EU is going to slap tariffs on Chinese electric cars, even though, by the way, many of the German auto companies said they don't want tariffs on Chinese EVs. They do not think that they will win a trade war. So there is a draft plan. So far, these, as of August 20th, that is 2 days ago, these tariffs are going to be in place temporarily, but then there is a definitive plan that's being drawn up. They're still waiting for all the special interest, pressure groups, gangs, to come in and lobby and influence and try to change their minds. But it looks like by the end of October, there will be a definitive long-term plan to tax European citizens when they buy Chinese electric cars. Because that's what tariffs are. They're a tax on your local consumers. Now, the goal here is to reduce demand for Chinese electric cars, and by doing so, increase demand for local electric cars. But the reality is the Chinese electric cars are so much cheaper than anything BMW or Mercedes-Benz or Fiat or Renault or Citroën or Volvo can produce. And therefore, even at 36%, my guess is the Chinese electric cars still win and dominate Europe. Just my guess. Now, China is, of course, not sitting back and just letting this roll. They have launched an anti-subsidy investigation of their own. And their investigation is looking at subsidies that the European Union and European government provide their, hold it, dairy farmers. All those French cheeses and Italian cheeses and yogurts and I don't know what else is, Greek yogurts and everything else that's exported, dairy products that are exported. I'd say cheese is probably the dominant one. Well, we all know, everybody knows, that the EU subsidizes its farmers. It subsidizes farmers quite a bit. So the Chinese are now going to say, look, if you're going to increase tariffs on Chinese cars because we subsidize our car manufacturers, we're going to increase tariffs on your cheeses, given that you... Now, all of these games are happening because they're all members of the World Trade Organization, and they can just slap tariffs on one another without, quote, excuses, but they're just excuses. The only country that can get away with just doing it, just slapping tariffs on and not even asking the WTO, is the United States, and that's because it's the largest economy in the world, and it can afford to do these kind of things. But these other players are trying to play it by the rules. So each one's going to investigate the other and who subsidizes what, and they're going to slap tariffs on each other, and guess who loses? We do. I mean, the consumer loses. The citizens lose. The individual rights of producers, importers, exporters, we all lose. We all lose from these stupid tariff wars. China wants to sell us cheap Chinese cars subsidized by the Chinese taxpayer. It's sad for the Chinese. but why not take the deal? Somebody wants to sell you something cheaper than what it cost them to produce. They want to give it away to you. They want to give it to you. Then why wouldn't you take it? Why wouldn't you take it? We're talking about automobiles. We're talking about an expensive product that you could get for a lot cheaper and thus have a lot more money left over to pay for other things in your life. And the idea that the European Union and the United States don't subsidize our own industries is ludicrous and just false. We all know that we do. We have huge subsidies in this country, and the Europeans are much worse than we are. So tariff wars in Europe in anticipation of more tariffs in the United States, particularly if Donald Trump gets elected. But it doesn't really matter. Kamala is probably going to impose tariffs as well, or at least not get rid of the tariffs that Trump put in place and that Biden has continued and actually increased. Biden has increased those. Trade wars are horrible. The trade war that was launched in 1930 by Smoot-Hawley ultimately led to the Great Depression being much, much worse than it needed to be. It ultimately led to global depression, and a trade war today would be catastrophic to our economy and to the global economy. All right, let's see. Let me just remind you that you can ask questions and use the questions to support the show. So you can put a dollar amount with the question, and that supports the show. The show is a listener-supported show. You can also use stickers and just use a sticker to as a show of support without even asking a question. Thank you, Robert, for doing such a thing. Ryan says, "Value for value, no mooches." Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate the support. So any amount, whatever you think makes sense in this trade that maybe that we are engaged in. You're listening. You're getting a value. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. All right. Everybody right now is in the economy, in Wall Street, and the economic front is really holding their breath. Because Fed Chairman Jerome Powell will be speaking at the Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming this week. This is the regular, once a year, late August, there is this conference that the Fed holds. It's the central bank conference that the Fed holds in Wyoming. And where usually the chairman of the Federal Reserve gives an important statement to the public. He gives an explanation of how he sees the world and how he sees interest rates changing over time. I don't know how many years they've been doing this. It's been going on for a long time, but this is like the big event for if you follow central banks and what they're going to do and if they're going to change. Often when they kind of change policy or change how they look at the economy, this is the place where they're going to announce it. Well, with job numbers coming in weaker than expected, and actually a revision of the job numbers from last year coming in, there's a lot of pressure now on Powell to lower interest rates. The economy seems to be slowing, and there's this whole supposedly balancing act that the Fed has to do, right? If it raises interest rates, inflation goes down, but it also makes it more expensive to do business, which suggests that slows down the economy. But if it slows it so much that there's a recession or unemployment goes up, well, that's no good. So then it has to lower interest rates. By lowering interest rates, unemployment supposedly goes down, the economy recovers again. So the ideal is this, what's called the soft landing. The ideal is that you raise interest rates just enough to crush inflation, but not enough to cause a recession. And then just as the economy might be slowing and maybe heading in towards a recession, you lower the rates and you save us from the recession and you create this beautiful, smooth, soft landing and nobody gets hurt. I mean, this is great fantasy, and it might work in this case. It might not. I don't know. I don't have that kind of crystal ball, and I don't think the Fed has either. There are so many variables that go into these kind of things. This is central planning par excellence. Now, they do have sophisticated algorithmic models. Maybe they have AI running the Fed, who knows? But the reality is that you can't centrally plan. It's not going to work right, and there are always consequences to everything that you do. Right now, the economy is slowing. The blame is placed on high interest rates, or people believe that the solution to this would be low interest rates. And the expectation is that the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates in September, and that'll be a good thing. The stock market is up again in anticipation of lower interest rates in September. Remember, when interest rates go down, stock prices go up. When interest rates go up, stock prices go down. Everything else held constant. Important to remember. Nothing is ever held constant, of course. Anyway, so right now there's a lot of angst, a lot of fear. Is it too late? Is September too late? Should he have already reduced interest rates this month, last month, 2 months ago, 5 months ago? Is it too early? If he reduces interest rates, would inflation come back? In a proper laissez-faire capitalist economy, in a free market, we wouldn't be discussing these questions. The market would determine interest rates based on supply and demand for loanable funds. There would be no central bank determining how much money was in the economy. There'd be no central bank dictating from above what interest rates should be. There'd be no, because on the one hand, the Fed tells us what the interest rate should be. One interest rate, the short-term interest rate. But the Fed is also doing all kinds of stuff in the background to manipulate those interest rates, which we can't always directly observe in real time. We might observe it later, but we don't know. They could be buying bonds, which increases the money in the economy. They could be selling bonds, which bonds that they hold on their balance sheet, which would be reducing the amount of money in the economy. We know after the fact. We don't know what they're doing. So we basically got a Fed that is a black box. I believe it's a black box to the people running it as well as to us. And yet, the whole world believes that our fate relies on them, that this is the most important decision one could make. The evidence of this is shaky at best. And of course, the solution to all of this is something that they won't even consider, they won't even think about, they won't even mention. And that is freedom. Freedom from these bureaucrats, freedom from these central planners who want to dictate the economy to us. And now, attacking the Fed is it's difficult to make the case against the Fed at a time when people don't understand the principles behind price gouging. People don't understand the principles, the economic principles that say price gouging is okay, but the economic principles about anything, about price controls, about rent control, about immigration, about tariffs. I mean, one of the things that should be obvious from following this show, from listening to the Yaron Brook show anyway, one of the things that should be absolutely obvious is just how thoroughly, unbelievably ignorant people are about economics. And even when they're not ignorant about it, the extent to which they act as ignorant, that is, to the extent to which they ignore economics. They ignore the science. They ignore the data. They ignore the facts. They ignore reality. I mean, it's one of these unique fields in human life where we really do know a lot. You can call economics a dismal science, but the reality is we understand and know a lot about economics. We know how the economy works in big picture. given that we can't centrally plan it, we don't know the minutiae, don't need to know the minutiae, but we know. We know some pretty important principles that apply to economics. Laws of supply and demand that affect, for example, price gouging. We know these things, and we can even, with a little bit of thought, we can understand the second level and third level effects of economics. It's not a baby science. It's a full-blown science of human action. It's a science of human trade, of production. And it doesn't mean it's not without flaws. It doesn't mean there's not a lot yet to be discovered. It doesn't mean that we know everything, but we know a lot of economic stuff. The problem is that you can't apply all this stuff that we know to the economy in a sense of, I can't say, oh, okay, I've studied economics, I know economics, so now I can run the economy. That's exactly the opposite of what knowing economics teaches you, is that you cannot run the economy. Or, I know economics, I've studied economics, I know it all, I can predict where the stock market is heading tomorrow. Of course you can't. And if you understood economics, and if you knew economics, you would know that you can't. That is knowledge that comes out of the study of economics. Economics teaches you what you can and cannot do, what is possible and what is not possible, what is metaphysically impossible, in spite of your wishes and your desires. It is a science, a very well-developed science with a lot of really interesting principles. Now, again, it cannot predict what will happen every time the government sneezes in a complex economy because it's complex. And because the complexity involves human action, which means human choices and human decisions. And you can't predict those, certainly not with certainty. And aggregating those decisions doesn't make any sense. So part of knowing the science of economics is to know its limitations. That is, to know not its limitations qua science, but its limitations qua what is the relevant field of study. And economics as a science is not supposed to tell you what interest rates should be. Because what interest rates should be, economics tells you, is whatever the market determines them to be at the intersection of the supply and demand for particular loanable funds. That's what economics tells you. It doesn't, the theories that we have, the Keynesian macroeconomic theories, are not economics. They're pretend, extrapolations from some local knowledge of economics, microeconomics, to assume that we can somehow run the entire economy based on that knowledge, and we can't. And that's why we get these problems with the Fed. That's why, the Fed has all these models, the Fed has all this knowledge. I mean, the Fed, does it get it right, does it get it wrong, is meaningless because there is no right or wrong. There is no answer to that question because the market is not allowed to function. Even the question of, does the Fed's particular actions do more harm than good? We don't know because we don't have a counterfactual. We don't know what the alternative could be, would be. If the Fed had decreased interest rates 3 months ago versus if the Fed increases in 2 weeks, do we really know what the difference would be? No, we can't. Complexity is too high, and it's dependent on human behavior, which is dependent on human choices, which cannot, by definition, be predicted. So, economics is a real science. Misused, abused, on a massive scale. Why? And why does nobody take the science of economics seriously? Right? why don't people pay attention to even the things that all economists agree about? Like all economists. 95%, because I think I saw a graph where 5% disagree. 95% of economists, this is like the global warming stuff, 99% of scientists, but 95% of economists understand the damage rent control does. And it doesn't matter. Cities will continue to do it. Politicians will ignore it. Individuals will advocate for it. Voters will vote it in. I think 95% of economists understand the horrific damage, which we explained yesterday, that price gouging does. And yet, it doesn't matter. Every state in the union has a price gouging law. Companies are being sued based on that law for raising prices during so-called emergencies. And there was an article today in The Atlantic that this is the title, right? Sometimes you just have to ignore the economics. Kamala Harris's proposed price gouging ban might irritate academics, but it makes sense to everyone else. Why does it make sense to everyone else? Why? What makes it make sense when it clearly is a violation of the principles of economics? It's a violation of our understanding of how markets actually work, how the economy actually works. What makes these anti-economics ideas hold sway? I mean, 95% of economists understand the damage of tariffs. Go try to persuade somebody in MAGA. Try to persuade somebody, a Trump supporter, that tariffs are bad. You just can't get through to them. They will support it no matter what. Most economists, I don't know if 95%, but certainly a large percentage of economists, over 50%, understand the damage minimum wages do to the people that are supposed to help, to the poorest among us. Does it make any difference? Most economists understand the benefits of immigration, even mass immigration, to the economy at least. Does it make any difference? Does it sway anybody? I mean, and I'm not talking about does it sway the other, but they'll still make the economic arguments against immigration, even though there are no economic arguments against immigration. And it just goes on and on. You can take it issue after issue after issue. And Europe and the United States and China and everybody ignores economics, ignores the principles, ignores the true ideas that are embedded in economics. And the question is, at the end of the day, why? Now, they will create massive rationalizations for why. They will tell you just so stories about how price gouging in this place, made it impossible for somebody in a wheelchair to get to the hospital to get his dialysis done because he couldn't afford to pay the excess gasoline. They can go on and on and on, giving you made up examples of just so stories of why it doesn't work. And they have to do that because they know that it does work. That price gouging does everything I said it does yesterday. That it benefits, it's a dramatic benefit to people. And of course, it's rights respecting. You don't have a right to get gasoline at a particular price. You don't have a right to get a hotel room at a particular price. It's whatever they want. And they're not bad for doing it. They're trying to make a living. And by trying to make a living and raising prices, they're actually increasing efficiency. They're actually improving things. Anyway, they'll rationalize it through complexity. They'll create complex scenarios where it seems like it all breaks down, but usually all that means is they're ignoring a bunch of stuff. They're not talking about a bunch of stuff that is relevant. They're just pretending it doesn't exist. And this is common. This is on the left and on the right and on the center and everybody. Because the one thing that you know in the world in which we live is that economic liberty is disrespected. Economic liberty nobody cares about, is nobody's interested in. And nobody's interested in it, they rationalize because it doesn't work. They tell us. And they have a million reasons why it doesn't work. For tariffs, they'll just mouth out some national security thing, or they'll mouth, which is a complete rationalization, or they'll say, you know, we have to, it's the only way to bring jobs back, even though the evidence is zero that they come back, or they'll play to some intuition, or the Chinese are subsidizing their businesses, so that's not fair. And that kind of creates, yeah, what about that? How do I deal with that on top of all the, so introduce complexity and bamboozle the audience. But the complexity is being introduced into their own minds. It's not, they're not doing it on purpose to bamboozle the audience. They're bamboozling themselves first. What's going on? Why is this so hard? And why do economists have such a hard time convincing people of the truth of what they're arguing? Again, this shouldn't be that hard. These principles, like what we talked about, price gouging last time, or minimum wage laws, easy supply and demand. It's really not that difficult to get across. Why can't they? And why is it dominated by the bad economists? So there's the obvious incentive that politicians have that in a free market, they lose a lot of their power. So there's no question that politicians, we understand their incentives. Politicians have no interest in understanding economics. They don't want to know. They don't want to understand. Because every time they dig in to understand something, every time they dig into understanding something, what they discover is that it will reduce the power that they have. That once you get economics, you understand how little politicians can do about it in a positive sense, and that all they can do is harm it, and that they should just stay out of it. Let markets work. Politicians don't want that. They don't want to hear that. Nobody spent their whole life engaged in political activism or engaged in getting to a position of power in order to not have power. They've spent their lives trying to gain power so they can execute power, which means control over other people's lives, power over other people's livelihood. That's what they want. That's what they desire. That's what they strive for. And that's what they achieve. So politics is not about economics. Economics has no relevance to politics, except in the sense that they don't want to fail so badly as to be blamed for the failure and then for the power be taken away from them through an election. So they generally don't want to rock the boat too much in any direction, because they want to make sure that they have plausible deniability, that they can, pretend that everything is fine, they didn't do anything wrong, it's not their fault if anything goes bad. But they have no interest in economic liberalization, no interest in economic freedom, no interest in actually improving your quality of life and standard of living. There's just no interest in that. Particularly if we don't vote it. Now, why don't we vote it? Why don't we demand it? So here's the interesting thing. I think there are two issues going on here. One is people are genuinely ignorant of economics. And it's very easy to the people in power to bamboozle them, to confuse them. And the intellectuals, the economists trying to explain this, come across as detached and come across as uncaring and come across as they probably don't have very good ways to explain the issues. But here I think is the key thing that politicians understand, and it really moves the public. I've said this many times in my lectures and my talks, and people don't vote their pocketbook. They vote what they think is right, what they think is just. So I'll give you an example. When it comes to this price gouging thing, for example, I told you there's this article today in the Atlantic magazine. Sometimes you just have to ignore economics. Kamala Harris's proposed price gouging ban might irritate academics, but it makes sense to everyone else. What kind of sense does it make to everybody else? Well, here's the key paragraph in my view. Now, in the article, he does all the rationalizations. Oh, it does this, and these people suffer, and it doesn't really work because there's not perfect competition, and there's noise, and all these rationalizations about how complex the world is and we economists just don't understand. But at the end of the day, here is his argument. Here is his argument, because it's not just ignorance. This is another way, I'm reading from the article, this is another way of saying that price gouging bans are a form of moral, ethical policy. The law recognizes that consumers, not being the coldly rational homo economicus of academic models, are going to be less price sensitive during disasters. Their desperation can be exploited. And people who lack the savings to get through a crisis or the resources to comparison shop are even more likely to suffer for price increases on essential items. In a pandemic, war, or major weather event, it seems morally repugnant to give an unearned bonanza to a big firm while denying essential services to valuable members of society. Vulnerable members of society. All parents, not just the wealthiest, should have an equal chance to obtain diapers, even if supply chains are disrupted. Price gouging law represent a different set of market rules grounded in fairness. And this is the bottom line, right? It's all about morality. It's all about what you consider fair. It's all about ethics. It's not about economics. I remember once reading, this is years and years ago, there was a big discussion in the 2000s, I think, about CEO pay at the time. And Robert Reich, who had been Labor Secretary under Clinton, wrote an op-ed. Robert Reich is still out there. You can find him. He hates Ayn Rand. I think he's blocked me on Twitter because he knows I'm affiliated. Anyway, Robert Reich wrote this op-ed. And in the op-ed, he spent 3/4 of the op-ed explaining in perfectly good economic terms why it made complete and utter sense to pay CEOs the kind of amounts that companies were paying them. And then he said, yeah, but it's morally repugnant to have CEOs making so much money when the employees on the shop floor make this little money. It's morally offensive. In other words, people like Robert Reich, and I think most of the intellectuals in our world, these are the people who actually influence our culture, understand that economics is on the side of free markets. They understand that from a purely economic perspective, yeah, let markets rip. But what prevents them from advocating for that, whether honestly or just as the way to manipulate people, is that it's inconsistent with their altruistic, their egalitarian sense of morality. Somebody will suffer. Not everybody's being treated the same. That offends them. And they understand that the American public, unfortunately, is very sensitive to these issues of so-called fairness, morality. And because we've all been raised by good altruistic intellectuals since we were very little. So nobody wants to know the economics. Nobody cares about the economics because real economics would lead us to a free market, which for them is almost by definition unfair, unequitable, immoral. For them what matters is morality. For them what matters is good versus evil. They're right. What matters in life is not efficiency. What matters in life is good versus evil. What matters in life is morality. What matters in life is fairness, properly understood, right? So, this is why people are ignorant of economics. They're not ignorant of economics because they haven't studied economics. They're not ignorant of economics because the economists are not explaining it. They're not ignorant of economics because the textbooks are lousy, although some of them are very lousy. They're ignorant of economics because they don't want the economics to be true. They understand that if the economics are true, they challenge their morality. People will not all be equal in a free market. If the economics are allowed to work, they won't all be equal. Some people will take a hit for a while, even if long-term they're far better off living in a free market. They might take a hit in the short run when they can't afford that gas to get to work. So they understand, I think all of these understand, that fundamentally markets, economics, economic principles, as Adam Smith understood, are driven by selfish human behavior, self-interested human behavior, even greedy human behavior. And they have declared all of that to be immoral, fundamentally immoral. To be selfish is to be immoral. To be self-interested is to be immoral. To be greedy is to be immoral. Therefore, when you say, companies can raise prices during some kind of spike in demand, well, they're just being self-interested. Yes, they are, by raising prices. And that by definition is immoral, so therefore it's immoral, therefore it's bad. Now I have to find the economic explanation for why I don't like it. But it's bad. Notice too the trick he does here. I mean, I love this, right? He says, it seems morally repugnant to give an unearned bonanza to a big firm while denying essential services, whatever. What about the little firms? What if the mom and pop store on the local corner gouges? Can they get away with it? Will state laws and Kamala Harris's law not apply to them? Well, of course they do. They apply to all companies. They're not, he couches it in terms of big firms because he knows he'll get the sympathy of Americans. Because those greedy bastards, those self-interested big firms. How much sympathy do any of these people have when the big firm loses business? Or when the crisis is such, or the change in demand patterns and stuff is such, where they lose money. When oil prices go below the cost of production, does anybody say, those poor oil companies, they're losing money right now, and yet they're still pumping oil out to provide it to us at a loss? Isn't that, something should be done to help them out? Well, of course not. And we all know that there are periods in which oil companies and other companies lose money for stretches of time. And yet they're not allowed to make money when the market shifts on them and suddenly benefits them. Then it's windfall profits, and we need to tax it. Or it's gouging, and we need to ban it. It's interesting also that in the beginning of this article, he says, price gouging is when a natural disaster happens or some emergency, some big thing. He says natural disaster, short-term demand, during an emergency, right? Where such a natural disaster, short-term demand cannot be met by short-term supply, setting the stage for sellers to exploit their positions. And then in the paragraph after the one I just read to you, he says, price gouging laws also protect against volatility and instability. During the immediate aftermath of COVID, unchecked price increases made an already bad inflation problem even worse, contributing to a dangerous spiral that harmed the macro economy as well as individual consumers. Really? How do you know? If the price increases were checked or unchecked, who gets to decide? There's no shock here. The increased demand is not a consequence of natural disaster. It's not a consequence of some shock to the system. It's a consequence of the government printing extra money. Prices go up because there's more demand from the public that's received more money from the government for doing nothing. So price gouging made an already bad inflation problem even worse. Show me one economic study that shows that. Show me one proof of that anybody could get away with that. Now, it is true that during certain periods of inflation, companies can raise prices in a way that increases their profits for a while, yes. Because they don't know how big inflation is going to be in the future, they defensively increase prices in anticipation of the inflation coming. And they might increase beyond that, and ultimately they might have to lower prices in order to take into account that the inflation that they expected didn't happen. But when they lower prices, do they get any credit for that? Of course not. So, this is all about morality. None of this is economics. And they will lie and distort and misrepresent and use words like bonanza to a big firm in order to get you all riled up because the big business is stealing money from the little guy. What's morally repugnant is their morality. The morality that says that we should sacrifice our own interests for the interests of others. The morality that says that the standard for us should not be our own well-being, should not be our own profit in the economic sense, but other people. And of course, all the economic negative consequences that exact position, that not seeking to profit maximize, brings about. By the way, the guy in the wheelchair who has to have a dialysis at the hospital and who can't get there because of, how many people in his local community would be happy to chip in a few bucks in order to buy him some gasoline? How many gasoline store owners would be willing to say, okay, you know what, we'll give you some for free, as they're gouging everybody else? It's just the whole thing is couched as you need a sacrifice as a producer, as somebody who's actually making this product available during this time of crisis. Because they might someplace, somewhere, in some universe, be an individual who might suffer because of what you're doing. And it's of course not because of what he's doing. They will suffer because the hurricane came. They would suffer because war broke out. They will suffer because whatever the big emergency event happened is. They're not because you have increased your price. And of course, by increasing prices, as we saw yesterday, there are massive benefits to people, like John Cochran's family, who could find a hotel room when they were desperate for one. They couldn't have found it if they hadn't been price gouging going on. All right, so this is just all to point out, as I have in many of my talks, as I keep doing, that the issues we face about economic liberty have nothing to do with economics. it's not like over the last 10 years, the American people and American politicians and American intellectuals have lost their knowledge of economics. And all across the political spectrum, from the far left to the far right and everybody in between, have adopted, I don't know, some form of statist economic policy because they understand that that's better. You know, take Republicans. Republicans used to have some general vague notion that markets work. That's gone out the window. Why has it gone out the window? Is it gone out the window because the economic understanding has changed? No. Is it gone out the window because the new generation of Republicans are economically ignorant? New generation of Republican intellectuals? No. It's gone out the window because it's not useful, because it doesn't get them what they want. It's in opposition to the moral claims they want to make about the evil of importing stuff from Canada, and China and Mexico and Europe and everybody else. The idea of, you know, some kind of romantic, bogus idea of self-sufficiency. That's what they're really after. The economics of it, you know, they all know that it has to lower quality of life and standard of living. They all know that immigration benefits the economy. The studies on this are unequivocal. It doesn't matter. It's wrong to bring in immigrants. It's wrong because they bring in their culture. It's wrong because they might actually replace some American jobs. They might, yeah. Americans might face competition. God, competition, we hate competition. So it's for cultural, political, moral reasons they don't want the immigrants. It's nothing to do with economics. And you could find everybody makes the excuse, but welfare, but this, but that, and you show them the numbers, it doesn't change their mind. Never does. People don't want the minimum wage because they have an understanding of the benefits. It feels good. It seems like the right thing to do. It seems like the moral thing to do, helping those people out. Nobody should get paid $7 an hour. It just seems wrong. Feels. What about the people who can't get a job when the minimum wage is 20? Well, we won't think about them. We're not going to talk about them. We're not going to think about them. You can teach that the minimum wage destroys people's lives, and people will still vote for it because it feels good. And yes, some people need to be sacrificed to make other people feel good. So, you know, the reality is that the debates out there have nothing to do with economics. They have everything to do with morality. And the reality is that we will never be successful in convincing people about laissez-faire economics and a laissez-faire world on the basis of economic arguments, because they're not interested in them. As long as they believe that sacrifice is noble, that sacrifice is good, as long as they believe that being self-interested is evil, is bad, is wrong. Being selfish, being greedy, by definition, are evil and wrong and bad. You can't have capitalism. There's no way to get it. There's no way to have it. They'll rationalize, they'll make excuses, they'll come up with economics just so stories to pretend that they're contradicting your economics. But what motivates it all and what makes their argument persuasive is morality, ethics, morality and ethics. And, other things like making people feel good, which is, you could argue, epistemological. When emotions are primary, who cares about economics? It's all about feel-good policies. It's all about what sounds good. It's all about what the notion is good, right? So, that's where we are. Unless we fight for egoism, unless we fight for self-interest, unless we fight for everybody's right to live their own life on their own terms without force being applied to them. And that is true of big businesses and small businesses, of consumers, of producers, of people out there. And remember, every consumer is ultimately a producer. Unless we fight for your rights, your moral rights, which means your right to live your life in pursuit of your own happiness, in pursuit of your own interests, your own life, your own values, forget about economics. Economics is useless. All right, so economic ignorance comes from bad morality, bad philosophy, bad ideas, a bad epistemology that elevates emotion above everything else, and a bad morality that denounces, more than it elevates anything, it denounces self-interest. The denunciation of self-interest kills capitalism. It kills economic freedom. It kills rational economic debate. Kills it. That's why, from the story yesterday that we talked about, John Cochran could not convince his mother. Could not convince his mother. Because for her, the motel owner was being selfish and therefore bad by definition, and that was it. All right. Let us turn now to your Super Chat questions. This is your opportunity to get me to talk about what you want me to talk about. If there's something in the news you want me to comment on, if there's some question you have about economics, about morality, about Trump, about anything you want, or any comment you want to make, this is your opportunity to do so in the Super Chat, either with a question. You can also, of course, provide the trade, the value for value, by doing a sticker, and helping finance the show. I should mention also that we have a number of sponsors for the show who make this show possible. Again, the show is funded by listeners out there. One of those is John Bobbin. John Bobbin has a YouTube channel, Phil Life, Philife, Phil Life, Philosophy Life. It deals with diet, exercise, longevity, all these things. He takes a very, very much an individualistic approach to these things. Now, I'm not guaranteeing everything he says. I'm not an expert, but he is a longtime listener to the show. He's a huge Ayn Rand fan, an intelligent guy, and I definitely would see value in what he has to say about these kind of issues versus the dozens and dozens and dozens of people who have YouTube channels chattering away about this kind of stuff. His attitude is primarily focused on you as an individual is not necessarily, the same as responders in a particular study. You have to know what works for you. How do you take all these ideas and these principles and this data, more than principles, we have data, and apply it to your situation, and how do you test? Is it working? Does it work for me? Doesn't it work for me? So go check out John Bobbin. The link is below. You can find the link below. It's a YouTube channel, and he does regular podcasts. Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor of this show, and right now they're seeking scholarship applications for our conference in Brisbane, not Sydney, Brisbane, Australia, December 6th to 8th. The conference, I'm going to be speaking there. Nikos is going to come over from Greece to speak there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's going to be really educational and answer a lot of your questions, delve into the philosophy in greater depth, a lot of talk about ethics and morality. We'll be doing that. How to use objectivism, how to apply objectivism in your life. But the important thing is, if you know of anybody who probably can't afford to fly there or can't afford the tuition to attend the conference, but you think would be a real value to have them there, or if you are a person, such a person, I know I have quite a few listeners in Australia, then please send them to aynrand.org/start here. And I'm not just talking about Australians. This is applicable to anybody in that part of the world. And I consider that part of the world going from all the way from, South Korea, Mongolia. There are people listening to the show in Mongolia. We should have some people from Mongolia coming down. China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. I don't know if there's anybody in Cambodia and Laos, but I know there are a lot of you in India. You should all be applying for scholarships. So please go to aynrand.org/start here. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that everybody's going to get it or that, they're going to cover the flight, but the flights in Asia, you can probably find some decently priced flights, and I think they'll cover, these scholarships will cover some of that, or maybe all of it. Apply. You've got nothing to lose by applying. aynrand.org/start here. Finally, Alex Epstein, Energy Talking Points. These are incredibly valuable, principles or concretes, principles and concretes to apply to any given issue on energy, fossil fuels, environmentalism. He has an issue every time. Every issue that's out there in the public, Alex will come out with a series of talking points with the principles and the concretes to be able to argue against the other side. Alex is the best thinker on these issues in the world today. Support him by going to alexepstein.substack.com and by subscribing. You can also subscribe, by the way, to an Alex AI, where you can ask it questions and you get Alex's responses. AI trained on Alex Epstein. Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, let's see. Where are we? Right, let me just say, wow, we've just got, Waco just gave his first super chat ever. He did it in a sticker, $1.99, which is fantastic, thank you. But he's basically being a trader, value for value, right? So thank you, Waco. You all should all be doing this. Anybody out there who hasn't supported the show in a while, or is not supporting it monthly on Patreon or on PayPal, please come over, just do like Waco did. Do whatever you can afford, even if it's $1.99. It all helps, and it all basically creates this trader relationship between us. It's not just me delivering and you receiving, but now we're traders. You are providing me with a value as well as me providing you with one. That is self-interest. That's what selfishness really is about. It's about creating and maximizing the number of trader relationships, the number of win-win relationships you have in your life. All right, let's start with J Mavs, who gave $50. Thank you, J Mavs. Really, really appreciate it. Some say public companies are the worst parts of capitalism because they only care about growth. They will cite examples like Warner Brothers, which is in trouble now, and compare it with something like Chick-fil-A, which is privately owned and doing fine. I mean, it's funny because, of course, those kind of things are all selective, right? I know a lot of private companies that are not doing fine. And I know a lot of public companies that are growing faster than Chick-fil-A. So you can selectively find a public company and selectively find a private company for any relationship you want. This is exactly what you shouldn't do when trying to think about issues. Public companies have unique challenges. They have challenges related to the separation of ownership and control. They have unique challenges of what are called agency costs. They have unique challenges where the people who control the business, the managers, are not necessarily the owners and don't necessarily do what's good for the owners. And what's good for the owners is maximize shareholder wealth. It's maximize returns. And so you can have public companies that don't do that. Now they will get punished in the marketplace for that, and ultimately ownership will change in those companies, or management will change companies until they start behaving themselves. And behaving here means doing what is necessary to maximize your productivity, to maximize your efficiency, to maximize profits, long-term profits, not short-term profits. Let me just see what's going on here. So that is true for public companies. They have challenges, but those challenges can be overcome. They can be overcome with very active boards of directors. They can become overcome by putting shareholders on the board of directors. They can be overcome by compensating CEOs with shares. But the reality is that the most successful companies in American history, the most successful companies in global history, have been public companies, have been companies that have boards of directors and CEOs and dispersed ownership in the form of stocks. So this idea that there's some disadvantage to that is just wrong. Yes, there are challenges that can be overcome, but there are also massive benefits. You can grow much larger, you have much more access to capital, and you can hire professional managers instead of relying on family or relying on a single owner who is guiding the firm. Public companies last longer than private companies generally. So no, public companies are a huge advantage in capitalism, a huge advantage over private companies generally. There's a reason why companies go public. Now, let me just add, public companies today are heavily regulated. So, we don't live in laissez-faire capitalism, I wish we did. But in a laissez-faire capitalist environment, there would be a lot fewer costs to being a public company, and the benefits would be even more significant. So in true capitalism, public companies would have a huge advantage. The thing that restrains that advantage today is regulations and controls, which should not exist. Let's see, let me just see here. Okay, anyway, if you want to ask your question, if you want to comment, if you want me to comment on what you're saying, jump in with a super chat. That's the best way to do it. Silvano says, what would Pakistan do if the U.S. took out Iran? Nothing. They would celebrate a little bit, but nothing. Pakistan is in no condition, in no situation to challenge the United States or anybody else. Pakistan has nuclear weapons, who knows if they work, but what's more substantial is they've got real problems in-house. They're struggling to feed their own population. They have political mayhem. Iran is not their friend. The Pakistanis are Sunnis, Iran is Shiite. They have disagreements about the border. They have all kinds of disagreements about who has more influence in Afghanistan. Literally, the answer to your question is nothing. Nada. They do nothing. Shazbot says, you can't always get what you want. Economics lesson from Mick Jagger. You can't always get what you want. That's true. But you can try, and you can work hard, and you can innovate, and you can figure out ways to get it. But it's still true. You won't always get what you want. Hopefully most of the time. Friend Harper says, NewIdeal live episode from 20th of September 2020. You and others talk about ARI's nonprofit status and what that means in the context to talking about candidates and such. Could you briefly touch on that? Scott types don't hear about that enough. Yeah, ARI as ARI, and that means people like me who sometimes speak for AOI cannot take a position on whether one should vote for this candidate or that candidate. AOI cannot take a position saying, vote Republican, vote Democratic, vote for Trump, vote for Harris, vote for this, vote for that. That is a violation of the 501c3 charter that we have as a nonprofit. We're not allowed to take political positions. Now, that is often loosely interpreted because we know that churches and others often do take political positions, and it's not often prosecuted. But with the Einman Institute, there's no reason to have the government come after us. They would love to come after us anyway over something like that. So we just don't do it, right? We criticize politicians and we compliment politicians from a philosophical perspective, but we don't do it from the perspective of this is how you should vote. Now, I do, but I am not the Einman Institute. I am not a 501c3. Your support of my show is not tax deductible. And therefore, I am not bound as the Yaron Brook show by those regulations. I can very well say, you should vote for this and not vote for that. You should vote for that person and not vote for that. I don't usually do it because I don't find that particularly interesting. And I don't think I should be telling you who to vote for. I can give you the data. I can give you my opinion. I can give you the context, but I don't tell you how to vote. But the reality is that I'm not bound by that as an individual and as a Yaron Brook show. I am not the Einman Institute. Now, as chairman of the board, in my function as chairman of the board, I would never say that, but I don't do this show as chairman of the board of the Einman Institute. I do this show as Yaron Brook. And when I was CEO, I was very, very careful not to endorse candidates, not to endorse political parties, even as I spoke at Tea Party events and all these other things. Very, very careful about that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much more we could clarify about that, but it's not that the Einman Institute cannot, even if it wanted to, and it certainly does not want to, endorse candidates. I'll also say this, which is worth noting. The intellectual charter of the Einman Institute, the intellectual charter, the charter written up by Leonard Peikoff when the Einman Institute was founded, basically precludes the ability of the Einman Institute as an institute to take those kind of political positions. Oh, the other thing we can't do, we can't endorse a law. We can't tell you to go vote for this. Like some, there's some organizations that do these phone campaigns and tell everybody, call your senator to vote for this. We can't do that as a 501c3. And our intellectual charter prohibits us from doing that. So Leonard Peikoff, looking ahead, said, I don't want an Einman Institute involved in those kind of things. We're an intellectual institution, an educational institution. Hopefully that answers your question, Fed Harbor. I don't think it'll ever answer the confusion that the, what do you call them, Scott types have. What can you do? All right, Silvanos, $100. Thank you, Silvanos. That's very generous. Really appreciate it. Need a few more of those today. Hey, Ron, I'm curious, what's some examples of questions you would ask of someone you're getting to know, whether they are receptive to objectivism? Failing that, knowing if they are collectivist or not. I mean, God, it's a very difficult question, Silvanos, because it so depends on the context of your relationship with these people. Why are you asking the questions? Just because you want to know generally if they're receptive to objectivism? What you really want to know from them is how receptive they are to facts, to reality, to changing their minds when faced with changing facts, right? That's what you want to try. Are they oriented towards truth-seeking? Truth-seeking. Because it's not like you're going to ask them, well, what do you think about selfishness? Well, of course they're going to be against that. Of course they're going to be against collective, they're going to say certain things. What you want to get is deep down, when you get to know them more and you ultimately present them with counter arguments, will they be open to them? So you want to try to see, are they oriented towards truth? Or are they oriented towards a tribe? Are they oriented towards what their mother told them? Are they oriented towards what their professors tell them, what the TV tells them, or what you tell them? So the way to craft your questions, or the way you want to watch their reactions to things going on in the world, to news events and other things, is by watching how they respond. Are they responded in a first-handed, in an independent way that exhibits that they're thinking for themselves, at least within the scope of what they know? So that if you present counter-arguments, they'd be, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe I was wrong. I mean, that's the attitude you want for people. Orientation towards reality, orientation towards facts, an orientation towards truth, not towards, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. So tribalism is something you want to weed out. So, and it's not about asking them questions, it's about seeing how they respond. When they hear a news item, do they instinctually respond in the way that you'd expect a Republican or a Democrat to respond? Or are they thoughtful about it? Are they thinking about it? Are they considering other ideas? When you counter, when you challenge something they say, right? So you hear something on the news and you challenge it. Are they then, that's interesting. Tell me more. That's the kind of attitude you want to see in people. And it's rare. It's rare. There's no question. So I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that helps. Whether they're collectivists or not, a lot of that comes down to, again, their independence. Are they thinking for themselves? Are they being tribalistic? Are they adopting values because they were told to? Or do they have reasons? They might be bad reasons. They might be wrong reasons. But they have to have reasons. And then are they open to being challenged on them? I mean, I think that's the best that I can do. Now, of course, recommending Ayn Rand's books is, as you say, is a great way to figure that out, right? Let them read. Let Ayn Rand tell them that they're wrong about these things, or they're approaching these things wrong, or the culture is wrong about these things, and see how they respond. Are they open to those arguments? Are they willing to listen to Ayn Rand? Robert, is Virtue of Selfishness and OPAR, Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff in The Virtue of Selfishness and OPAR? Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff write that, quote, "The objectivist ethics holds man's life as the standard of value," unquote. Shouldn't objectivists advocate this standard to counter those that have contempt for life and produce misery? Well, yes, and I think that's exactly what we do, right? We advocate man's life as the standard of value. That's what it means to be self-interested. That's what it means to pursue your own happiness. That's what it means to pursue your own values. What does it mean to hold man's life as the standard of value? It means that man should be left alone to pursue their own values that are chosen by them, based on their reason, based on their life. Right? So I don't understand the question in the sense that I don't understand in which sense you think that that objectivists are not advocating the standard. Right? This is what egoism means. This is what self-interest is. This is what we're advocating all the time. All the time. So if you want to follow up and explain why you think we're not, I'm happy to hear that. Merrie, yesterday, towards the end of the show, but after I'd left, already asked which opera we're going to see on Sunday. On Sunday, we're going to see La Traviata. Now, it's not a full staged opera. It's kind of one of these summer things where they've got an orchestra and they've got singers on stage, and I think they're partially some, they're going to be costume and there's going to be some action on stage, but it's not a full production, unfortunately. But it is in this beautiful building here in Barcelona, in Old Town Barcelona. We're looking forward to it. This Sunday we're seeing La Traviata, and next Saturday, the following Saturday, we're seeing Madame Butterfly. So two of the classics, two of the greats. And I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun, because even if the singers are not literally world class, even if they're just really good, which I'm sure they will be, those operas are hard to spoil, hard to ruin. They're so beautiful. Merrie Benz is writing to PhilosophyAtWork. Did you know that 23 degrees is pi divided by 8 in radians? Pi over 8. Think about it. All right, this is beyond my abilities at, what time is it? 10:36 at night. Pi over 8. Pi over 8. There's some meaning there, deep, important meaning that I am missing. Jeremy Morton, I hate the word fair. It seems a package deal of justice and altruism. By the way, have you read Hanania's essay yet? So I agree with you. When they use it, it is a package deal. It's a package deal between giving you a sense of justice, not real justice, but it's all about egalitarianism. It's all about altruism. Fairness, objectively, is justice. It's getting what you deserve. It's not fair that I didn't get what I deserve. That's what it means, right? Getting what you deserve. And what you deserve is going to depend on the context, right? But so fairness is justice. And it's not a word I would give up to the left just because they use it as a package deal. Not just the left, sorry, the right does the same thing, all of them. The conventional culture. I have not yet read Hanania's essay. It was up on my computer today. I have it, and I will get to it, I promise, probably over the weekend. Matt, do you think people disdain a free market because they fear having to rely on their own ability, no confidence in themselves to earn a proper living? Yes, I think there's definitely an aspect of that. I definitely think it's a lack of self-esteem. There's definitely a psychological element to the reason people object to a free market. They have low self-esteem, and they don't have the confidence that they can thrive in such a system, and therefore they reject it, even though they know it'll work in some sense. They don't have the confidence that it'll work for them. So yes, this is the lack of self-esteem that altruism creates. It's all part of the same challenge, the same problem. To elevate people's self-esteem, you have to change their moral code. You have to change the morality that they hold. Andrew, how do you think it's psychologically tenable for the Obamas to deride wealth so explicitly and live a first-class lifestyle, including owning several multi-million-dollar mansions? I think they rationalize it as they've earned it. They're making up for past injustices. Michelle Obama is big on racism is everywhere and racism is systemic. Well, this is their way of compensation for all that racism that they suffered and that their families have suffered. It's basically a rationalization. We've served, we did community service, we've been in this, but look, at the end of the day, psychologically, they can rationalize it all they want, but it's massive evasion. It's massive evasion. And they're horrible people. They're not happy people. They're not content people. They're miserable people because they live this unbelievable contradiction. They lie to themselves regularly in order to sustain the rationalizations. They know it's incompatible with what they politically stand for, what they morally stand for. But it's the American system. Why shouldn't we take advantage of it? Andrew, it's not morally persuasive to argue against raising prices based on conservative talking point that grocery industry profit is only 1.6%. Even if it does underscore the absurdity of the left. Yes, I agree, because that's not the argument. The argument is, but what about the guy in the wheelchair? What about the just so story that tugs at our heart and that is an expression of somebody suffering who's worse off than you are? And more importantly than that, the price gouging itself is an expression of self-interest, an expression of the right of that individual to use his property as he sees fit. And that is something that altruism negates. You're supposed to use your property to serve the common good, to serve the public welfare. How dare you not? Whether there's somebody suffering or not right now, how dare you not? And who gets to decide what the public good and the welfare is? We do, the people in power do. All right. Ian, any comments on the Canadian rail strikes and how they affect the U.S.? I mean, the Canadian rail strikes are the negotiations between workers in the two main Canadian railroads, and the railroad companies have, basically fallen apart. Workers have gone on strike, and the companies have locked them out. So, I think this is a major issue for Canada and for the United States, but primarily for Canada. It disrupts the logistics. It disrupts supply chains. So things that rely on Canadian goods, Canadian parts, auto industry in the United States, which relies on getting parts from Canadian auto parts manufacturers, agricultural products, lumber that we might get from Canada, that's just going to halt, and it's going to cause prices to go up. Somebody's going to gouge prices because they can't get it from Canada, so prices will go up. We know they'll go up. And Kamala Harris will complain. So it'll have a significant impact. How big of an impact? I don't think it's massive. I don't think the amount of trade, and I think a lot of shippers will find ways around it that are maybe more expensive, but around it, they'll use more trucks. But it is definitely disruptive. And if you're running Walmart, or if you're running a big supply chain business or logistics business, it's going to be challenging, and you're going to have to find ways around it. And people will lose money, and some people will, there'll be gouging going on, and there'll be all this will happen. So, but I don't think it's going to shut down the U.S. economy or shut down the Canadian economy. I don't think that the economies are that fragile. Apollo Zeus, what did you have for dinner last night? Well, because of these shows, I'm not really having dinner, a significant dinner. I'm having a bigger lunch, so I'm trying to make lunch the main meal of the day, and dinner a light dinner. So we had pretty light dinner yesterday and today. What we have is we have some. We go to restaurants for lunch. Yesterday, where did we go yesterday? I can't. Oh, yesterday was Indian food. We went to a small Indian restaurant here in Barcelona with good Indian food. It was quite tasty, very spicy. The final dish was very spicy. And then I think on the way we stopped and we got some coffee and a tiramisu. So that was basically dinner. But we're going out for lunch, and we've eaten some phenomenal restaurants. We ate at a great restaurant today. Having a good time eating in Spain. Spain has great food, some of the best food in the world, maybe the best food in the world. Wako, what about Israel? What should Israel do about religious extremism. And what Israel should do is have a separation of state from church. It should have a secular constitution. It should basically tell the religionists if they want to be religious, it's on their dime. It shouldn't tolerate, it shouldn't subsidize 1 millisecond of these people's lives. They should establish a constitution where there's a complete separation of state from church, state from religion. And if people are still religious under those circumstances, so be it. Which means that if you have, for example, conscription, if you have a draft, you can't say, oh, I'm having a draft, but I won't draft people of a particular religion, like ultra-Orthodox Jews or Muslims. No, if you have a draft, you draft everybody. That's the rule of law. Ideally, you don't have a draft. But if so the law has to apply equally. It shouldn't discriminate based on religion. So what Israel should do about religious extremism is separate state from religion. Paulo Zeus, Looney Tunes or Merrie Melodies versus old Disney cartoons from a similar era, your vote? Yeah, Looney Tunes, easily. Bugs Bunny wins every time. All right, we're almost out of questions. Almost out of questions. Next 10 minutes are your last opportunity to ask additional questions, to use the super chat. Fen Harper says, follow-up. I ask because Scott Types wail against ARI because its approach to politics, not understanding it's an organization formed to promote and advocate Rand's ideas. I get they won't hear it though. Yeah, but it's more than that. What if I had an organization that was geared towards politics? They'd wail as well because they don't agree with my politics. The Scott Types don't agree with my politics. It's not just that they don't agree with my approach or they don't agree with ARI because ARI doesn't take a particular stance. They don't agree with the way we approach politics, with what we think about politics, with what we think about candidates, what we think about issues. They don't agree. They want us to be conservatives. They are conservatives. They're not objectivists, most of them. So, they're wailing against ARI because we're objectivists, and that offends them. Home account. Many people in social media with passionate views on the left and right seem uninterested in socio-economic data. Even when you post links, they just claim the data is corrupted by the elites. Yes, and this is why at the end of the day, the battle we fight is not one that can be won with data. It's not one that will be won by economic studies. It's not one that will be won with anything other than a full frontal philosophical reckoning. The battle we fight is a philosophical battle, a moral battle, an ethical battle, not an economic one. And I like data and I like models and I like economic papers, but the reality is many of them are flawed. Much of it is statistical data that's hard to interpret. A lot of times it's wrong. A lot of times it is corrupted. The data is corrupted. But the actual reality is that it's never going to matter. It's never going to matter. What you need to do is change people's philosophical approach to the fundamental questions about life. And that you cannot do with data. I mean, statistical data. Yeah, you have to do it with facts, with reality, but not with statistical data. That requires a different approach and a different kind of way in approaching these kind of issues. A philosophical approach, grounded in reality, grounded in facts. But facts as supporting the philosophy, not facts as proof, facts as evidence, facts as evidence, fact, not as proof, not as the end result. Statistical studies. Statistical studies are useful, but in trying to make a moral argument, But the fundamental moral argument is one about self-interest or altruism. What facts are you going to use there? I mean, facts in terms of data, statistical data. These are deeply philosophical questions that you have to answer. And without answering them, the data doesn't matter. How can you change someone's morality? Doesn't it fall to each individual to do it themselves? Oh, ultimately, yes, of course it falls to you to do it yourself, but you can provide them with the data, with the arguments, with the arguments to change their minds. So Ayn Rand changed my morality. She didn't change my morality with going into my brain and tinkering with it, but by giving me things to think about, by giving me counterexamples, by giving me a philosophical argument. I had to think it through, integrate it into my life, figure out whether it was right or wrong, and then change my morality. So it's true that you have to do the work yourself, but God, other people can help you. Other people, Ayn Rand, for example, can give you guidance and can give you the orientation, the facts, the direction. I would never have done it myself without Ayn Rand or somebody, because I'm not a genius. It takes a genius to come up and to originate something like this. Let me just... Let's see, Paul says, I'm an aerospace engineer working on satellites in the UK. I'd like to move to the US to reach my full potential. However, due to regulations, I can't work in space without a green card. What is the best way to get it? God. I mean, the best way to get it is find a company in the US that hires you and sponsors you for a green card. It's very hard, but that is the best way to do it. An alternative way is to come to the US and get a graduate degree, even though you might not want a graduate degree, to get a graduate degree, and then find a company that'll sponsor you to get a green card. You know, there are all kinds of alternatives, like marrying an American, but those, at the end of the day, you need a company to sponsor you, and it's not easy, and they're making it harder and harder and harder to do. You have to find somebody who will do it, and maybe the easiest way to do it is to come here for graduate school. But it's no guarantee. It's still going to be hard. This is the crummy world which the Scott types want to preserve, where it's really, really hard to come to America, even for a qualified aerospace engineer. But that's, you know, that's because the Scott types are conservatives. They don't care about your individual right. They don't care about your individual life. They're collectivists. All right. Andrew, what do you make of the fact that many people give up on fairness as though it's a childish notion, most prominently expressed in the saying, life is not fair? Well, it makes complete sense, right? It makes complete sense. Fairness has become a package deal of altruism and justice. But the standard for justice is altruism, it's egalitarianism. And in that sense, yeah, life's not fair. Life's never going to get you the altruistic ideal. Good, right? And they get it, and they are happy to some extent that life is not fair. Because from their perspective, fairness is this confusing concept, but much of it means equality, and they don't want equality. And sometimes they use it in terms of getting what you deserve, and other times they use it in terms of equality. So it's completely confusing to them. And when you have such a confusing concept, when at least part of that concept is also focused on an injustice, altruism, egalitarianism, then yeah, life is not fair. Life does not play by those rules because those rules are corrupt and anti-life and inconsistent. Absolutely. James, do you miss California? Do you think you will ever move there again? Besides the taxes and the wacky politicians, was there anything else that made you want to leave? What about Tampa? Did you consider anywhere else besides Puerto Rico? Yeah, I miss California. California is an amazing place to live. It's an amazing place to live for a number of reasons. It has fantastic weather. It has amazing scenery. It has a beach. You can go ski. And it's unbelievably comfortable. The grocery stores are amazing. The driving, I mean, the one thing I disliked about California is traffic jams, but in Orange County it wasn't that bad. We had toll roads, private toll roads that got you around a lot of the traffic jams. Amazing ability to get anything you needed. Everything you needed was available to you easily, which is very different than Puerto Rico. It's clean, it's new, particularly where we lived in Orange County, but even in San Jose when we lived there. It's just a fantastic place. Now, and if you don't live in the heart of San Francisco, if you don't live in downtown LA, you don't see the homeless. I mean, they're homeless here in Barcelona as well. I mean, they're lying in the street, and you see them everywhere. You see homeless people in Austin, Texas, under the freeways everywhere. You see them everywhere. California is not unique, and particularly if you're out of the two main cities, if you're out of San Francisco, downtown LA, and maybe downtown San Diego are bad. But other than that, Orange County, there are no homeless people. I mean, there are beggars in the street, but there are no homeless people in Orange County. So I cannot think of anywhere with a higher quality of life. Put aside taxes, regulations, and wacky politicians. You don't want to own a business in California. Labor regulation is awful. So again, just living. If you're retired, you've got money, and you just got a place to live. I mean, cost of living and traffic and taxes and regulations. But in terms of the day-to-day stuff, best place on planet Earth. Can't think of a better place. For me, I'm not saying for you. I don't like Tampa. I don't like Florida generally. Flat, boring. I don't know. I just don't like it. Humid. I like the dryness of California, and you still pay federal taxes. So no, I didn't really consider anywhere beside Puerto Rico. I mean, the point was this: if I'm going to leave California, it's not going to be because of the difference between, state taxes, right? It's not going to be state taxes that'll drive me out. So, is California worth, in a crazy kind of way? It's never worth because it's coercion, but is it worth the 13% or the 10% or 8% or whatever the tax rate is in California? Yeah. Puerto Rico gives you the ability not to pay federal taxes. So now you're not going from 53% to, let's say, 40%. You're going from 53% to 4%. That makes the humidity, the heat, the shitty grocery stores, and everything else worth it. And you get a cost of living that is a lot lower than California. So I bought a condo in Puerto Rico that I could never afford in California. I can't afford it anywhere in the United States, probably. Well, anyway, I'd want to live in the United States, but I can't afford it in Puerto Rico. So certain parts of your quality of life go up. So California, the biggest problem probably for most people is the cost of living. Cost of living, and that's regulation. That's a consequence of housing regulation. It could go, cost of living could come down dramatically if they built more homes, significantly built more homes. It would also mean a lot of people would lose some of the equity value of their homes. But that's exactly what should indeed happen. Anyway. So, yeah, I mean, Chandler says he lives 20 minutes from San Diego, downtown San Diego, homeless people around. No homeless people in Orange County where I lived. You won't find homeless people in Irvine. You won't find homeless people in Laguna Beach. You won't find homeless people in Mission Viejo. I mean, maybe here and there, and people do stand in the corner, you know, asking for money, like in a traffic lights with a baby and, you know, stuff like that, but you don't see homeless encampments anywhere in Orange County. So, you can find places in California, same in San Jose. I mean, unless you go into downtown San Jose. Stay in the suburbs, you don't find it. Again, you find homeless people in most good cities, unfortunately. All right. Thanks, guys. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll do a positive topic, something cheery, something uplifting. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great night. Thank you to all the super chatters. Really, really appreciate the support. Yeah, we're $45 short of our target. If somebody wants to come in and do that, that would be fantastic. But otherwise, see you all tomorrow. Bye.